Congratulations on your Emmy-nominated work for Poker Face. I absolutely love the show so much, and yeah, and especially the Orpheus Syndrome is such a great episode to be nominated for. Um, and there's a lot going on in terms of setting and locations in the season and in this episode. What was this one of the most challenging episodes of this season? I know you guys worked on more than one this season.
Yeah, the episode had a lot of um, intricate parts, and Cathy had been working on some of the set dressing for months, along with we were in touch with several puppet makers, including Phil Tippett, who actually made the short film that's part of the episode. And so he had been involved sort of early on, and he made some specialty pieces for the episode. He also was kind enough to rent us and lend us some of his pieces from previous films. So we had those brought in from California, but it had many different parts, definitely.
Yeah, Cathy, can you speak to, yeah, what do you have anything to add about the complexity of the episode?
Well, like Martha said, we were block shooting and we were doing other episodes simultaneously. And I knew from the get-go when I saw the script that this was going to take a lot of research and a lot of scouting around to find other creatures that worked with the Phil Tippett creatures. And we had a preview of some of the creatures that he was sending us, like photos, but we didn't actually get them until, I guess, a week or so before we were shooting. So we had to kind of figure out what creatures would work in the world of Arthur, the character played by Nick Nolte, and try and find model makers and creature makers across the country, really, upstate New York, California, whatever, that would kind of blend with the same kind of characters that he might create in his history. So I think we kind of nailed it on a lot of those. We found some great creatures, some great illustrations. Martha had some contacts from her years of experience in the business as well. And we pretty much pulled from all the resources we could find to get these additional creatures to dress the barn of Arthur, which was Arthur's animation studio. And it was a pretty big space. And we
Yeah.
loaded it up. We had Phil Tippett's studio as reference. We had other studios as reference, or similar animation studios. So it was a challenge, but it was a fun challenge for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking about I'm gonna jump ahead to one of my questions since you kind of brought it up. I was thinking about Arthur's space and how there's so much character development in each of these spaces
Mm.
too. And all that work and everything he's collected through the years, like how are you able to show us decades of work without spending decades doing it, obviously?
Well, we also had the idea of the whole episode was based on an idea of a company like Industrial Light and Magic, and we had to also create the history of that company. So, we jump back in time and we shoot the three characters when they're younger as well. And we did a little photo shoot, which actually some of it we shot, some of the scenes that are interviews with the younger characters were actually shot in our scenic shop, where
Wow.
we were also trying to work and create. So it was a little bit tricky to manage finding time to do that. But it was about creating a history of these three characters who had built this company that then turned into, a big sort of physical effects and also visual effects company. So part of that is Arthur's barn, but then also when we went to the sort of opening party and creating the history of what a celebration of a company like this might be, and kind of what their evolution had been through the years too.
That's fascinating. What does your collaborative process look like? Yeah, how do you work together and then also working with, I'm assuming you work a lot closely with Judy Ree too.
I've worked once before with Judy, and it was a number of years ago. It's where we met, was back in Montreal, doing a show called Patriot. And we've been trying to work together ever since that. But the timing has never worked out. So when she phoned me for this, it was perfect timing. And I was very happy to be brought into New York to work with her. Yeah, and then Cathy, have you worked with Judy previously on?
No, not before this job. She and I had talked probably 8 years ago, even a couple of times since, trying to work together on different projects, but I was always booked or not available if something came up. So as you, kind of welcomed the opportunity on this one. It sounded really interesting. Sounded like a good challenge, which I like. And I think the group that we had with Judy as production designer, you as art director, and the rest of the team, some of our set designers, some of the all came up with some really creative ideas to expand some of the spaces and add on to some of the spaces, areas that worked with the script, and it kind of flowed, and it was a good working kind of relationship on many levels, I think.
And the other really creative side of that was Natasha Leone as well, who was directing this episode. And she came into it with so many ideas and so much sort of input that just her ideas just flow, and you kind of have to keep up and keep up with her energy. So it was great to work with her in that capacity as well, because we've been seeing her perform, but when she got to direct, we really saw the depth in which she was involved in the scripts. She co-wrote the script too.
Yeah, and it's such a kind of a defining episode for her. I feel like she meets all these people along the way, but this one she's really affected by Arthur and his demise, unfortunate demise. I was wondering, I was thinking about too how so you're building up years of character development and the set and the art with Arthur, but then with Charlie, she's just coming in and how do you add character to somebody who's like she's a stranger coming into these spaces and like or like I guess yeah, I know that that's so much part of it is adding that character, but I feel like it's probably such a challenge to have this new character come into this new area.
I mean, that's the great part about the kind of hook of the show is you meet the characters and you see the spaces and you kind of get immersed in the world, and then you realize that Charlie's been there the whole time and she's got a little part in each of these things. I mean, going back to the first episode with Charlie's character, we were trying to dig and figure out how do we create her space. And what is her world when she's on the road? She's always, hopping from state to state. So she had her car, and that was sort of her thing. That was where all her possessions were. And then in different moments, we had, we had some of her things that she would pull out of that car. But that kind of became her world. And then she popped into all these other spaces, which made this show so interesting, especially for the art department, to be able to create all these different worlds.
Yeah, I think you also had her trailer in one of the early episodes, the first episode, that really kind of nailed her character with its mishmash of things and debris, and she was her casualness, I think, kind of came through that set a lot.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask you too about, well, I guess I'll go to the flashback. The 1989 Dragonfish film with the water tank in the movie set. That had to be really cool to work on. You kind of already briefly spoke to this, but yeah, tell me a little bit more about, setting up that and maybe even thinking about, how like film sets have probably changed in 30 years.
Yeah, definitely. We had lots of discussion with the lighting department about, we rented all the old types of lights that
Wow.
they used to use then. And, you know, most people on the crew actually had a nostalgic moment of like, oh, I remember these.
Ah,
But we did at that moment before we set up that little behind the scenes kind of shoot. We had that area of the stage that had a full lighting rig, modern lighting rig for shooting the car. So we actually had to take the entire thing down and then put up a new one because it just looked too modern. So we had to, you know, even the pipe, we took down all the rails and we put up a new, like an older style of grid and all the old lights. The tank we had specially made.
wow.
It was made by an aquarium company. They do big displays for museums and giant fish tanks. So we had that specially made and shipped in.
And then the
then
seaweed, we brought in some from a effects person, and then Duke Scopa, our prop master, also helped with the rigging and the finding of the seaweed, I believe.
Wow.
one of the things that's a challenge when you're shooting a set that's immersed in water is that you have to be very careful about what kind of treatment you put on everything, from the costume to any of the elements that are going in the water, because you know, anything that gets in the water can start to cloud it or can become debris in the water. So we had to be very careful about what we were using. There's you know, at the bottom of the tank, there was an attachment for all of the seaweed, and we had to specially treat that so that it wasn't starting to affect the water.
Wow, that's fascinating. I also wanted to ask you about, I feel like one of the first things we see is, you know, Cherry Jones's Laura and Tim Russ's Max and their minimalist type, I guess minimalist house that just looks very wealthy. And I was thinking how that kind of really just sets a tone there. And what kind of considerations did you make with this to really help us get a sense of who these people were before we're even into the story?
Well, I think we had to create a difference in the sensibility of design between Arthur and what the business eventually became, which was more futuristic, more kind of space monsters and stuff. So his creatures reflected kind of a different theme, a little more earthiness. And LAM's creations after that were more Star Wars, you know, Star Warsy,
Yeah.
and you know, you definitely gave each of them a different sensibility. Her space was more modern. The Cliff House, the mansion, the furnishings were more modern. The kitchen, you know, all this stuff that defined who she was. And then, you know, just to distinguish those characters, she's more hardline and cutthroat, and hopefully that kind of reflected in the hardness of her decor.
Yeah.
And Arthur's design sense and casualness is more the barn and the studio and his space.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally comes across. It was great. Okay, so one last question. You guys have answered these like oh so beautifully. Did you is it, the busts of the bust of Max and the other busts, like I think you kind of spoke maybe briefly to this before, but did like how did that, what was that like? Was that the prop person, or like were you involved in that? Like that just seemed like those were so cool and creepy.
That was the craziest process. So yes, Duke Scopa, our prop master, was heavily involved in having a replica bust made of Max. And then I don't know who came up with this idea. I think it was Natasha who said, okay, we have the bust, but I want it to be so lifelike that you expect that you're going to see him breathe.
Oh my gosh.
So she decided she wanted to use the actor in place of the bust, which meant that we had to come up with ways of creating furniture pieces for him to be inside, with a little kind of, we made a little box that sat around his shoulders, and we fit it especially to him and made a little velvet piece that came up to him so that he would be in kind of wearing this box on his shoulders, and then he would rest himself on the dining room table, for example. There was also one where at the end in the party at LAM, we made a plinth that he was inside. So at certain moments, and then we also did it with the big giant box where he gets delivered to Cherry Jones. And so we had these 3 pieces, and at certain moments, what you see on camera is the bust, and then at other moments, what you see on camera is actually the actor playing the bust. And so you get this very eerie sense that it's so lifelike because it is the actor.
That is so wild. I can't believe that. That is so crazy. Oh my goodness. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. And was there anything you wanted to like, anything that you think is a fun fact about working on the episode that hasn't been mentioned? It's such a great episode.
Maybe the only other thing to talk about is just the location that we used for the LAM headquarters, which was such a cool building. It was designed by IM Pei, and it was an old office headquarters that there were multiple pyramid buildings like the one that we used on this huge complex, and the whole thing was empty. And I think the owners of the building have been looking for a company to come in and take it back over as a headquarters, but it was such a cool space. We had a great time exploring, and that's where the archives were shot too. So down in one of the lower levels of that building, they have these rooms full of shelves. So, and Cathy had to create all of the history and the archives and all
cool.
the old equipment that she brought in. But it was a really special location for that headquarters, I think.
Yeah, just exploring that location on the Scout, because it had formerly been the IBM, I think, corporate headquarters up in upstate New York there in Hastings or wherever. And it was such a spectacular space, but it was deserted. So we got to kind of go around and see there was still art on the walls and some of the furnishings, and the space had an amazing spiral staircase between 2 levels. And that was just very cool and inspirational for what we actually turned it into. And then Martha, you guys, the art department, created a triangular shaped space that we added to the back of it for Arthur's creature display, and for Cherry Jones to run through at the end, and ultimately to her demise. And it was just such a cool space. I still think fondly on the design of that and what was added to it and how it blended so well.
Yeah, and putting Cherry Jones in that great dress in the middle of that glass pyramid with the image of the film playing behind her. It was, Natasha was very and Jaron, our DP, they were very creative about how they saw this space being blocked. And so, yeah, it didn't quite have the geography that we needed. So we added to it to create this perfect exit through the exhibit on the way out.
That's so great.
For the for the, I guess, archive room, I had so much fun bringing in and locating a lot of old film history type equipment and film reels and canisters. I mean, I've been in the business long enough to have worked with a lot of that stuff. And since then, I've had people in the business and not calling me saying, "Where'd you find the Steenbeck? Where'd you find the 35 millimeter cases that were shipped, and had." So there was a lot of that kind of stuff that we bought and pulled from eBay or sources or collectors or whatever. And some of my buyers weren't even aware of the difference between 16 millimeter film and 35 millimeter film. They thought 16 millimeter was the measurement of the roll across the diameter of the roll. And I said, no, that would be the height of the roll versus 35 millimeter, 400-foot cans, 800-foot cans, 1,000-foot cans, you know, so they got an education in the process, and I got to play with some of the old history and stuff that I grew up in, being on film sets for years.
Cathy also brought a stop motion filmmaker out to the barn to help us set up the little scene. The set itself was created by Phil Tippett, but then the cameras and the way that they meticulously kind of, you know, move a character, take a photo, move a character, take a photo, which also took me back to my first days. One of the first productions I ever worked on for free was a little stop motion animation for a music video. And it took a month to shoot because it was, you know, move a hand, take a photo, move a hand, take a photo.
I know when we got the first order of creatures from Phil Tippett, and we opened them up and we're setting up that diorama that he also built and sent, and there were no instructions. They were going to be sending their consultant the next day, but I think Natasha and the DP wanted to see it early. So we had to kind of figure out how it would work, how it works, and set it up in advance for them. And it helped that I kind of knew something about the dimensions of the set, and also the creatures, which we would be afraid normally to touch because they have hair and all kinds of stuff and they're very delicate. But then I realized that, wait a minute, the insides of these creatures are articulated. They're metal with arms like a robot, you know. So even though they've got like a prosthetic skin and hair over them, you can move them very gently. So I said, no, watch, here's how it works. And you stand it up and you move the arms and you can move the legs one step at a time or whatever. So that was fun. We got to play.
Yeah, it sounds like so much fun. Like what a fun show to work on, period, though. Like that it's always changing, and new characters and new sets, everything. It's got to be so much fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, and we had two decorators on the show because, you know, when Judy read the treatment for the show, she knew, well, this is going to be quite a challenge because every 10 days of shooting, we have an entirely new set of sets. So she got Cathy, and we had another decorator, Lizzie, and the two of them would sort of hopscotch and do one episode after the other, so that we had a little bit more lead time on each of the episodes.
That makes perfect
that really
sense.
helped. And because there were no amort sets, or what we call standing sets, that would last for the entire show. So each episode had to be its own unique episode. And so each decorator had a team with her specific episode. So we hopscotched a little bit and alternated. And that was great. We worked well together also.
That's great. Wow, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting with me, and great work.
Okay, Megan, thanks.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Okay.
Bye,
Martha,
Cathy.
call me. See you. Bye-bye.